start off with a light pencil sketch. I'm just using the reference photo just to get an idea of what the bird looks like. I kind of wanted mine to be a little chubbier and a little more round. I usually like to start off my paintings with a wet on wet technique, so I just kind of pre-wet the section I'm going to work on. I'm going to start with my branch first because I'm going to build layers as the painting goes on, but I kind of want to get that first layer going. I start with my raw umber, just laying down a good foundation. I still want it to be watery, but a decent amount of color, because with watercolor it soaks into the paper and it lightens. So we're just going to continue to build that color. I've got my burnt sienna. It looks all nice and vibrant right now, but it's going to become a little more dull after it dries. So this will just be the first layer. I'm using my number 10 round brush for this part of the painting. I'm going to use some of my Daniel Smith Moonglow. This is one of my favorite colors to use as a shadow. It's not flat. As it dries, it kind of, the purple and there's some blue in there, and it just kind of gradiates, I think is the term they use, and it just makes a shadow look nice and soft. Take a little bit of paper towel. This is one of my favorite techniques, and I just tap out a little bit of that color, and that's just going to start the first layer of texture. Then I'm just going to build that color once again with my Moonglow. A little bit of my raw umber and a little bit of my burnt sienna. I get a little impatient, so I always have a hairdryer handy, and so I just kind of dry that branch so I can get moving on to the bird. It also helps me not stick my arm in the wet paint. I'm going in one more time with a paper towel, building in that texture once again. Now I'm going to pre-wet the chest of the bird. It's kind of an orangey brown chest, so I start with my orange, using a cadmium yellow orange for that base color. Dropping in my burnt sienna. It helps bring in a little bit of that first layer of dimension. And I just want it to kind of bleed into that orange. But that orange still comes through. I'm just using light little strokes, kind of feathery little strokes. I don't want any hard edges. Later we'll come in and put in some of that feathery detail, but right now we just want it to be soft. Adding in a little more of that burnt sienna, just building the vibrancy. I'm going to let that dry. And now I'm bringing in my water again. We're going to start working on the blue, and I don't want any harsh lines, so that's what my water's for. I'm going to continue kind of with that wet on wet technique. I do overlap a little bit into the orange because I want the blue and the orange feathers to kind of mesh together a little bit in the areas where the blue and orange feathers touch. My inspiration photo is just that, an inspiration photo. I didn't draw it exact. I kind of made my bird a little chubbier, but it just gives me a reference to go by when I'm kind of working on the details and the colors. I'm mixing in my ultramarine. I want this first layer to be vibrant. Really kind of thinking about where this blue is going by looking at my inspiration photo. It's easy for me to kind of get lost in the details, so I'm trying not to. My brain tends to look at the details a little too soon. I also decided to make a branch instead of the bird sitting on a fence post. I just love making branches, so I just made it my own. It's just fun to experiment, try new things, think about your composition, and maybe your inspiration photo doesn't have the right composition, so you kind of create it yourself. You just have fun with it. Sometimes I use more than one inspiration photo to get everything right. The one might have the color I want, one might have the composition I want, one might have the background I want. So sometimes I'm compiling many pictures into creating what I want to create. Now I'm using a little indigo blue, kind of working on my shadows. Those tail feathers are a little bit darker than the rest of the bird. I'm adding in my water, mixing a little bit of that raw umber and Moonglow. Just want to add in a little bit of shadows to kind of indicate the feathers. But I want it to be really soft and watery. And while I wait for that to dry, I'm just going to add in another layer of shadow into my branch. We're going to kind of start building that 3D effect in the branch. And the reason why I lay water down first is I want those colors just to kind of spread softly. I don't want it to be a harsh line. And so when I'm adding a color wash or a shadow on top of something, I always pre-wet. That's just my technique. It's not something you have to do, but it's what I choose to do. When it dries, it'll be a nice soft shadow. These smaller details are a little challenging. It's hard to work small here. I'm just taking my time. I'm using a round number 3 for these details. I'm using a little Payne's Gray and my number 3 round brush to put in the eye. These can be a little challenging to work so small. I could be using a smaller brush, but I feel like I have a little more control over the color with this number 3 brush. Just working a little slowly so I don't make any mistakes. I'm trying to add in that shadow there. It looked a little too harsh for me, so I kind of wet it down a little bit and kind of decided to tap that out, start over. That's a nice thing, and when your paint is still wet, you have the option to kind of blot out what you just did. This is where I start layering in a little more shadow, a little more soft detail. This part of the painting is where the bird really kind of creates its character, its feathery detail, and also this is where the illustrative side of my brain goes a little crazy. So this is the part where you really can make it your own. You can add more feathers, less feathers. I'm just kind of using my raw sienna and my burnt sienna to bring in some vibrancy in those soft feathers. They're not really detailed, but it's just giving you that idea that there's feathers, kind of creating his fluffiness. I'm just going to keep working in the detail until I'm satisfied. We're finally getting to the bird's legs. Just using a little bit of my raw umber, Moonglow, and Indigo. Just going to place them in there, not worrying too much about detail, just getting the idea of the legs. I want to add the last of my dimension to my branch, so I'm bringing in a little more of that Moonglow, just making those shadows a little bit darker. All these layers of shadows that we've put on the branch is really what kind of helps create that 3D effect in the end. And I just kind of keep adding my shadows until I have the effect that I'm going for. Now I decided to use my waterproof micron pen. It's a small 005, so it just has light little details. Now you really don't need to do this. I just love doing this. I love bringing in a little bit of pen at the end to add just some of that little bit of texture. I'm almost like scribbling. But this is just what I love to do. It's just more of my illustrative style. If you're a purist watercolor artist and you don't want to use other mediums, then that is wonderful for you. I do many paintings where I just use watercolor, but I just enjoy the drawing aspect of it. So I'm just bringing in just little bits, nothing too harsh. In the end, you almost don't even notice the pen. Now I'm just coming in with a little bit of white gouache. I just want to add a little bit of highlight into some of those feathers. Also, another thing you don't need to do, but I enjoy having just a little bit of highlight, and sometimes you just can't save out those white spots. So I'm just adding in a little more feathery detail. That white will kind of soak into the paint that's already there, so once it dries it will just be really soft. You'll hardly notice it, but to me, I notice it and I really enjoy it. So it's just up to you whether you want to add that last little detail. For me, kind of the last 10 minutes of my painting is really where I build the detail and character of the subject I'm working on. For me, it's where the painting comes to life. And so I love adding in those extra little details. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, that you learned something new, that you want to try something new, create something new, and just enjoy the process of learning and creating.